Welcome to the Radical Rhythm Podcast. This has been created for those of us that love radical women who live perhaps by the rules, but also question and challenge the status quo. We want more from our lives, to enjoy our sexuality, to explore radical thought, and to celebrate women who have lived and continue to live unconventional lives. Hi, I'm Dr. Toni Bear, sexologist, educator, activist, and definitely a radical woman. Thank you for joining me as I share stories of women challenging the status quo and living life to the fullest. Join me as we unapologetically march to the beat of a different drummer together. What if you had a particular fetish or fantasy and could walk into a bar and find somebody for the night who wanted to do the same thing? And what if you wanted to have a particular sexual act done to you? How would you find someone who wanted to do that same sexual fantasy? And what if the internet were not created yet? And what if the act or fetish was taboo and or illegal in the community where you lived? Well, welcome to our Hanky Code discussion. This was a discussion I ended up having at the end of a retreat with 10 other business women about how one could find another person into a particular fetish with one another. And I mentioned the Hanky Code, and next thing you know, the conversation blew up. It became animated, it became fun, and I thought I wanted to share it with you in the Radical Rhythm podcast. I think that this would be fun, but also informative. Recently, when I traveled to the Carter Johnson Leather Library and Collection in Evansville, Indiana, I found a copy of the lesbian Hanky Code, and I wanted to share that with you too. So, where did all of this come from, and what exactly is the Hanky Code? Well, the Hanky Code is, you know, made of legend and myth, but we do know that it came from most likely the 70s and 80s. And it's a practice where someone puts a bandana in their back pocket. If they put it in their back left pocket, they're a dominant, meaning that they want to do the activity. And if they put the hanky in their right pocket, that means that they want a certain activity done to them. And this hanky code initially began in gay male bars. It was one way to find somebody for the evening that is into what you're into. And it spread from there. And there were just a few colors in the beginning. One of the most popular color was red, and red meant fisting. The act of fisting is putting your whole hand inside of somebody. Some people like anal fisting, and other people like vaginal fisting. This took off, and you would find the hanky code and the colors of the code at erotic bookshops and sex shops. Different queer businesses printed the hanky code and would distribute it at their businesses. It was a very popular thing to share. And over time, the colors became much more extensive. And you might be interested in this, and let me show it to you. If you're watching on YouTube at this time, you can see that I just put it up here for you to take a look. As you can see on this Boston Eagle handout, it has the name of the bar, the address, the phone number, and also the hanky code. This is used as a promotional business piece that's printed and available at the bar. This came from the 1970s, the Boston Eagle, and we can see the first one is probably the most popular, which is red, which is a fist fucker. Burgundy into razor blades and blood. Salmon wants to be shrimped. Um, Pink likes orgies. Orange, anything, anytime. Purple, meaning trashy or piggy. And as you can see, if it's worn on the right, it is the opposite. So if purple means trashy piggy, to the right means purity. Now, those of you that are listening to this, and you can read down the list yourself, but those of you that are listening to this and you're familiar with the Hanky Code, you might say some of those colors are wrong. That's not the way it is. Well, the colors and what they mean have changed through the years, and for the most part, as you look at that list, it's pretty accurate as to the way that the Hanky Code is used today. However, purple today in 2021 usually means piercing, um, but it also depends on who you are. So this list from the 1970s in Boston was in a male gay bar. Now, years later, women came out with their own list. And the list came from the west coast of the United States, Samoa. And we see it published. And let me put that up for you now to take a look at the handkerchief color code for lesbians. You can see a similarity where red means fist fucker, dark blue, anal sex, top, whereas dark blue today means sex or intercourse. So we see an evolution again, a change over time, right? Um, and you could read down the list yourself that you see. And again, this is Samoa. This is an SM club from the West Coast, from the San Francisco area in California. And this is from the 1980s. So, those of you that are listening to this podcast can't see this. These are on YouTube, and you can find us on YouTube so that you can see copies of this handkerchief code from the 1970s and the 1980s. And, we find that in the 1980s, for the gay male culture and the introduction of AIDS, the hanky code is going to lose its popularity. Folks are afraid of contracting AIDS and dying. So free sex, open sex, meeting folks up to have common sexual interests and pickups for the night decreased in the late 80s, early 90s. But we're going to find in the late 90s the hanky code actually picking up in popularity. And at that time, we're going to find the hanky code getting very, very flamboyant with lots of different codes for different kinds of aesthetics. Um, we find that it is part fashion, but also part pickup, right? So different fetishes, a military uniform inspired dress, or gladiator inspired accessories traditionally made in black leather, became part of the ensemble that a leather person or SM person would wear in the 1990s to today. So when you look at this and you're saying, well, I'm not into SM. It's not my thing. Um, what does this have to do with me? Well, let me take you down a trip down my memory lane and just talk about trying to have sexual experiences that were fun and safe. When I first came out as a gay woman, there was no instruction manual as to how to be a gay woman. What I saw around me from other gay women was that you get into a relationship and you nest. You live with that person fairly quickly. The stereotype and joke within the gay community has been and continues to be lesbians bring on their second date, they bring a U-Haul, right? And, there's some truth to that. So, I got into a relationship fairly quickly when I came out as gay, but I had all these fantasies in my head and that I really wanted to live out. Now, while the Hanky Code is being used in San Francisco amongst lesbians, I haven't met those lesbians. I'm actually an hour outside the city in the early 90s, 91 to 93. And I'm trying to figure it all out without a manual. How do I have sexual experiences with women and just have it be temporary, just to try something, just to experiment, just to have a fantasy fulfilled without commitment? Now, had I met the women from Samoa and those in the Bay Area that were into S&M and used the Hanky Code, it would have been much easier. My experience as what they would call a vanilla lesbian, someone who's mainstream, was I had to figure it out to figure out what is in somebody else's head, what they want, and what exactly do I want. And I'll never forget the evening that I went up to Sacramento and I went to a gay bookstore. And, one of my favorite magazines was On Our Backs, and it had an SM kind of theme to it. It was part pornography, many articles about sexuality, and I found it nowhere else. There was one other magazine at that time called Bad Attitude, and that was a harder core SM type magazine. And at that time, that didn't interest me. So I would read On Our Backs, and there I am in the bookstore reading that. And there were some tickets available for a concert. When I bought my magazine and the book, I forget which book I bought that day. The clerk behind the cash register asked me if I wanted to buy one of these Holly Near tickets. Now, Holly Near is a lesbian singer. I think she's actually bisexual, and but she has a huge lesbian following. And she sings the love kind of tunes, the lyrics being a woman loving another woman. And I wanted to meet somebody, so I bought Holly Near tickets, and I had a few hours extra. So I walked over to the lesbian bar. Now, this was early. It was like 5 o'clock, and the concert wasn't until 8 o'clock. And I just sat there and had a drink and ordered some food. And a woman walked up to me and she asked me if my name is Susan. Now, my name is not Susan, but I thought, let me play along. Obviously, she had a blind date with someone named Susan. So I said, yes, my name is Susan. And she sat down next to me and we talked for about an hour. And it was one of those kind of ads in the back of a magazine, kind of finding one another. And she said, do you want to come to the bar tonight? We're going dancing. I said, no, but I'm going to a concert, Holly Near. And she kind of rolled her eyes inside her head that was kind of old fashioned music. And I said, well, how about if I meet up with you after the concert? And she said, great. So I met up with her at the bar. Now, had I had the Hanky Code, I would know exactly what she wanted for the night. She would know exactly what I wanted for the night, but we had to figure it out. So some alcohol, some dancing, lots of friends. She invites me back to her house. I follow along with all of her friends and they proceed to party. Now, I'm at a house I don't know with people I don't know, but I want to have an exciting sexual experience. So I stay and I'm waiting for the other people to go away, or however we were going to make a first move and somebody was going to initiate a sexual experience. And as I stayed there, they started smoking pot. As I stayed there, things started getting strange. But I really wanted a sexual experience. I wanted a fantasy. This whole night was so much fun. And after I came out of the bathroom, I saw there was a gun on the table. Now, most people at this time would think, okay, alcohol, drugs, gun, red line, leave. But not me. I'm trying to have a sexual experience with this person that it's looking good. I'm thinking in my head, perhaps it was the alcohol. And the next thing you know, she says, you have to leave. My pimp just called and they think you're a cop and you better leave before he gets there. So I left. Talk about a dysfunctional evening. And that's why I'm explaining it to you, because I didn't know where to go to have a sexual experience. I didn't know how to have it. I hung in there way past the point that I should have been in that house with drugs, with alcohol, with a gun, and now with a pimp and his friends coming to the house to interrogate me because they think I'm a cop and I'm there because I'm so different than everyone else that's in the place at that time. Um, I think about the women in San Francisco that night. I wouldn't meet them for years. And what they did and how they did it. And, now that I'm friends with folks that were actually in the city, in Samoa, or some of the clubs and the parties that were going on, I know now that that's where I wanted to be. But they were scary to me. I was much different. At that time, I was just coming out as gay, and the whole idea of going to an S&M party where people are doing a variety of sexual activities, some of which at that time would have made me very uncomfortable. It was way beyond where I was. So you might be asking yourself lots of questions like, well, where did this all come from? Some believe that the Hanky Code came from cowboys and miners during the California gold rush. You see, there were very few women out there. So, as you can see in the picture, cowboys are dancing with cowboys, and that the handkerchief or bandana was used to identify who would lead and who would follow. Sometimes tied around the arm, sometimes tucked into a pocket. That would be a part of the cowboy culture. Other people reference the village in New York City as a place that it started with gay men in the 70s. Other folks talk about World War II. Jack Fritcher of Drummer Magazine talks about World War II soldiers coming back and that the biker gangs and the hankies being a part of the biker gangs being in the back pocket to wipe off the dirt and the sweat from one's brow became part of the hanky code at some point in our history. Whether it came from cowboys or gay leathermen or gay men that were in the military coming back from World War II, we do find that the hanky code is something that is legend in the gay male community. I came into the gay community in the early 90s. The hanky code was part of lesbian culture. I found hankies at festivals being worn by women, designating if they were a top or bottom or kinds of activities they wanted to engage in. But I would say that the majority of us had no idea what the Hanky Code was. So if you've never heard of the Hanky Code, um, you're not alone. There are more people who don't know about it than do know about it. But in this day and age of Me Too and consent, um, the Hanky Code could be very, very useful for anyone wanting to signal to a partner as to what they would like to do or not like to do for the evening. How do we get into somebody's head to understand what they want? Do you communicate with your partner? And how do you communicate with your partner? Imagine kind of like a mood ring from the 19, I don't know, mood rings in the 70s. Um, wouldn't it be nice to know what somebody wanted? If you are into picking somebody up for the evening and hooking up, wouldn't it be nice to have that conversation ahead of time? In fact, it's not even nice. Having consent and knowing what somebody wants and having permission for something that somebody wants is not just important, it's mandatory. So I find that the Hanky Code is truly useful. I'll end this podcast with a short story about meeting my wife. I met my wife in a gay bar. She was with her friends, and I was with my friends, and we were at a charity event. And she was flagging a bandana in her back right pocket. Well, that let me know that she wanted something done to her. And she was flagging white. Now, mind you, I had a phone and I met her in 2012, so I could look this up really quick. And I found out that what she was flagging meant masturbation. And, I found that fascinating and it led to a conversation. Now, at that time, she was involved with somebody else. So the conversation went no further. But I thought it was fascinating and interesting way to meet someone, have a discussion with someone, and to find out, well, what about masturbation does she like? Does she want to do it in front of someone else and be an exhibitionist? Does she not want anyone else and is self-sufficient? Um, is she into mutual masturbation? There were so many questions. Now, how to finagle to start that conversation was curious to not come off as somebody totally perverted. But at the same time, she was flagging. So that meant the conversation was open. And within 6 months, she became single. And I remembered that flag. And it led to another good conversation, which led to a date, which led to a relationship, which led to a marriage. So today, to come on and talk to you today on the Radical Rhythm podcast about the Hanky Code, it was the lack of the Hanky Code in my life at one time that led to multiple dysfunctional situations. In fact, some dangerous situations, like the one that I explained to you earlier. But it was the Hanky Code where I found the love of my life, the longest relationship I've ever had. And I wanted to share that with you today. So I hope you Google it, look it up, look at all the colors that are used today. And I hope that facilitates a conversation with your partner and find out what they think about it. Wouldn't that be a great conversation to have one night? And if you're single, hey, buy yourself a bandana. What can you lose? Till next time, this is Dr. Toni Bear. Don't let anyone dim your shine. And it's all about the joy in life. So find your joy, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to the Radical Rhythm podcast today. It has truly been my pleasure to invite guests and talk to you about my passion, the joy in our sexuality, and radical women who march to the beat of a different drum. If you'd like to work with me, Dr. Toni Bear, I have a community where I give seminars every month. I also have a coaching program, both group and individual, and also a course, a self-directed course, because it's all about experiencing the joy life has to offer. I'd love to work with you. Check out my link below, www.tonibearedd.com. See you next week, and don't let anyone dim your shine.